Hi, Danielle. Good to see you. Welcome, welcome. Thanks for being here, everyone. I'm going to invite you up, Danielle. I see your hand is raised. We're just getting started. Hi, Danielle. Good to hear from you. Can you hear me? Maybe there's something going on. All right. Well, I just wanted to get started here today. I've been off Clubhouse for the last couple Thursdays. My schedule has been all over the place. And it's been really difficult for me to get consistent Clubhouse rooms. Hi, Danielle.
We missed you.
Oh, thank you for saying that. I really appreciate that.
Unfortunately, I
Um,
can't stay, but I just saw it pop up and I was like, oh!
well,
So I just wanted
honestly,
to
that
come
just
say
makes
hi.
me feel so good that you came up to say hi, even though you can't stay, because sometimes just starting these rooms by myself can be overwhelming.
Yeah,
And
daunting as anything.
yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. But I wanted to talk today about something that is near and dear to my heart. Self-care has been something I've always been excited about, something that I've always naturally gravitated towards. But when I learned I was an HSP, I was able to really ground into the fact that not only do I need to take care of myself, it's essential for me to take care of myself. And self care for HSPs is a lot different than going and getting your nails done or getting your hair done or a spa treatment. Um, these are daily practices that we need to embrace so that we can allow our nervous system to have a break. And from listening to HSPs, talking on Clubhouse, being around an HSP community, I have really taken note of what is super helpful for HSPs in terms of self care. So I created a blog post that goes into a little more of the nitty gritty list that I'm going to share with you today. Um, and when I say 5 essential self care practices, it's almost like 5 essential self-care categories that then have these micro steps underneath them. So I'm going to share that with you today. Um, but I'll just give a little background about myself. Um, my name is Julie Staub. If you've not met me yet, I have been doing Clubhouse rooms, excuse me, in the Highly Sensitive People Club since March of 2021, which just blows my mind. Pretty consistently, other than hitting some problems in 2022 to be consistent on Thursdays, it hasn't always lined up with my subbing schedule, which I actually started subbing back in high schools at the beginning of 2022, which I had not done for almost 2 years because of the pandemic. And what's really exciting about that process of going back to subbing is that the heart of the work that I want to do with highly sensitive people is to actually connect with highly sensitive youth. And so being a sub has allowed me to get into the system from an insider outsider viewpoint, to connect with a part of the population because I do not have children. I am not in a school setting because of my own children. So to be a sub and be able to connect with these young adults is super exciting. And one of the things that I did immediately, especially after talking about this trait for a full year on Clubhouse, is to start dropping information with different teachers, school counselors, administration staff. And one of the things that I thought of would be to donate the Highly Sensitive Person book by Elaine Aron to the high school library. And when I did a search of the whole district, the only school was an elementary school that had the highly sensitive child. So that book didn't even exist in the high school libraries. So through that process, I then reached out to the journalism classroom that I was a sub for, and they had a spot on the internet that I could suggest an article to be written. And I actually pitched an article to bring awareness around the trait. And the two high school kids that I pitched it to, one was the editor, and I'm not sure the title of the other young gal, but basically they learned about the trait, about being an HSP through my article pitch. And now they have taken this on as an extra assignment because they're extremely passionate about getting this message out. And that article will be published, I think, next week. So I'm really, really excited about that. So my work that I love to do with HSPs is really offline, but because of the pandemic, we had to pivot and make everything go online, and that's when Clubhouse came into my life. So that's a little bit of the motivation for me creating this club. And obviously, I wanted it to say highly sensitive people so that people who were familiar with the term highly sensitive person would be able to find us. And if you're familiar with anything I've shared about Elaine Aron and her work and her research, she has this thing called 5 necessities, where she talks about the 5 necessities for HSPs to survive and thrive. And one of those is to connect with an HSP community. So I created this community not only to bring awareness around the trait, but also to allow my ability to heal as an HSP and to connect with other HSPs and build that community here. So I'm just really excited that you're here. I'm grateful that I've been able to sustain this consistent, mostly weekly way of connecting and talking and educating and advocating for this trait. It's something that I feel deeply about and I'm very passionate about. And this is what really serves that purpose in my life. So one of the things that really motivates me to help youth is to give them the tools, the preventative practices that can enrich their life and prevent them from going down that path, which I have been going through myself, which is a lot of chronic pain and chronic health issues, anxiety, and having the awareness of the trait at a earlier age has so many benefits. So that's kind of my target market as far as spending time in education and advocacy in that arena. But I just really enjoy the conversations in this club. I'm really excited that some familiar faces have popped in here. I feel a little rusty with Clubhouse, so I'm always excited to see some familiar faces, and I would love to also hear from people who are in a space to come up on stage and speak and connect on this topic that I'm going to share with you. So that is a long-winded, of course, story about my connection with the trait, but I learned about the trait in 2018 through the movie Sensitive. And if you haven't seen that movie, definitely check it out. Elaine Aron created a series of films that are kind of like documentaries, but they're kind of cheesy, to be honest with you. But they do a great job of illustrating the trait, and that's the whole point of those movies. But it really just opened up my world to have better boundaries and to really put my needs first and to really look at the self-care practices that are really impactful for HSPs specifically. And so I kind of just came up with a list that generalizes these 5 essential self-care practices. But there, of course, as an HSP, there's a lot of depth to each of those categories. So I included the blog post link on the top of the room here. If you don't see it, just go ahead and pull to refresh your screen. So if you want to take a look at that link, that's what I'll be going over today. So if you just are the type of person that likes to have written word to complement what we're talking about, that is what we're going to be talking about. So to start off, I would love to just invite anyone up here just to get the conversation going before I go into more monologue here. What do you think is most helpful for you as an HSP in terms of self care? What are practices that you have kind of returned to over and over again that allow you to feel grounded, that in time to reset your nervous system, and then also, make you feel like you can be out in the world better so that you're not at this kind of hide from the world mentality because the world is too much. I'm overwhelmed by the world. But when I do these practices, I have the ability to expand my cup and allow for more social interaction or to share my gifts with the world and not be overwhelmed by being out in the world. So I would love to hear from Allison. Thank you for being here, Allison. Thank you for coming up on stage. It's so lovely to see you. What would you like to share on this topic?
Hey, Julie. I'm glad to be here. Glad I caught a room. Haven't been here in a while, so I'm really happy that I was able to make it.
Yay!
This is beautiful topic because as an HSP, really being able to have practices to help keep myself centered and grounded, to calm me, um, is really, really important. And I think one of the things for me is knowing my triggers and understanding my triggers. That's huge. And that comes with time when you start to really observe it as you learn more about the trait, especially if you're new to it, like I'm new to it. Um, but knowing what my triggers are and then being able to take it from there into some kind of self care practice. And since I am a Reiki master, Reiki is my go to first before I do anything. Um, and I try to see if that can help me eliminate whatever I'm starting to feel, whether it's overwhelm, if I'm starting to feel really anxious, or I hate to say overly emotional, but that's like the best description I can say right now. um, because I can and do have those moments, and so that's why I said knowing my triggers is huge for me. So, um, thank you, and I'm complete.
Thank you, Allison. I think that awareness practice will come in with one of these bullet points that I'll be sharing. And knowing what triggers you, like you mentioned, is then going to allow you to curate your experience and put yourself in situations that won't trigger that trigger. I think is really important. And I think a lot of times HSPs who don't know they're HSPs might have this mentality to muscle through it, or I should be able to handle this. But I don't think that that is great for our nervous system. And so when you don't know you're an HSP, that comes with its own set of information that we're navigating. But when you do learn that you're an HSP, I think we go through this journey and this healing process of really taking stock and having an inventory list of what we need to bring into our awareness so that we can better navigate and eliminate some of those triggers, especially if they're in our control, so that we can just be in more of a preventative mode, but also not have a lot of those super high highs and super low lows, and just kind of keep that flow inside our nervous system brackets. I know there's a technical term for that. I just listened to a podcast about it, but that is what our nervous system is supposed to do. We're supposed to be able to get to this kind of up and down curve that we respond to things, but to go into overwhelm is when our cup is running over, or the hypo is where we don't have enough stimulation and we're hiding in a cave and we're not engaging with the world. So we want to be in the middle of those two extremes. So having that conscious awareness around our triggers, I think, is huge. So thank you for sharing that point. I will let Casey share. What would you like to share, Casey?
Hi, Julie. Hi, Allison. Hi, everyone here. Yeah, I think for me personally, actually two things. So, uh, what I've been doing is actually, I guess you could say, setting boundaries for sure. Because I think, and it's not just like, because I understand setting boundaries is definitely something as well that I've sort of struggled with as well because I am a type of person that, has like I struggle with saying no, but I think and this only happened I think a couple of months ago actually, beginning of this year, where I didn't realize that you know the stimulation that I had, and it's not just from surroundings, but even from people that are in my life, have really actually affected me because there'd be times where I would hang out with certain people and then I would feel a certain way and I wouldn't really know where it would come from, and I think absorbing a lot of these like energies have definitely drained me, and I think just knowing what is good for me and to be able to set them, you know, honestly it's actually not easy because I had to actually, you could say, set a distance for people that, that I actually do care about, and if I've actually been friends with for some time. And to be honest, I do value friendship, and it's just that I think also, yeah, so even setting that is actually quite hard for me as well. But, it's I guess starting, to do that is definitely one thing. And just being more in tune with myself and kind of like listening to my emotions regarding and it's really hard because sometimes I do feel kind of left out because not a lot of people in my circle get this, and so I think even just doing that for myself and not you know um, letting people's reactions to it get to me as well is also another thing. But I did read your article, Julie, and I do appreciate it because I didn't know, and yeah, that's the second thing I wanted to share. And I didn't know that water is actually um, such an integral part to self care. Because so there was a couple of times where I would feel so overwhelmed by just so many things that's happening in life, and I am definitely a water person. Like I love the ocean. I love water, and so I actually went to the beach, by myself and just you know sat there for like an hour, and it really did help because it sort of like made me feel that the things that I've been feeling is sort of like small, if that makes sense. And yeah, so I was really I was really shocked and surprised to see that as the first one on your article, and I was like, oh wow, like I thought it was just a personal preference, something that I personally like, love, but I didn't know as a HSP like this was actually very integral. So now that I've read it, I was like, okay, I guess I should totally, make this a routine more and not just going there when, things get overwhelming. But yeah, that's all I wanted to share. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you so much, Casey, for taking the time to read the article. It's very bullet point, so it's easy to kind of scan over. I appreciate you sharing your experience with water and just kind of coming to that realization that this is something that we can really hone in on to take care of ourselves. I know before I learned I was an HSP, I had this magnetism to water. And it wasn't like necessarily immersing myself in water, although I was a junkie at the local pool. Like I was there every single day. I don't even know how I was able at such a young age to like get on my bicycle, go the couple blocks to the pool and be there all day without supervision. I'm a kid of the 80s, so we had a little free range parenting back then. But I was just in the water all summer to the point where my blonde hair would turn green from the chlorine. So I've just always been gravitated towards it, but I didn't really understand until I talked to a lot of other HSPs and how soothing water can be for us. And so I'm just going to read the bullet point list that I have, and maybe that will trigger some things that you do on your own or new ideas that you haven't tried or thought about, that can be helpful for our self-healing, our ability to calm and soothe ourselves and give our nervous system that really deep restorative calm. So the first point, like Casey had shared, that I brought up is to connect with water. So having a connection with water, especially when you're feeling triggered, especially when you have maybe some kind of internal stimuli like anger or upset or just emotions that are kind of amping you up. I think it's really helpful to visit a body of water, whether that's a stream, a lake, a pond, the ocean, and just sit and relax next to that body of water. And it helps me to process emotions and feelings that I may need to release that are stored in my body subconsciously. It's funny, I have a Berkey water system. And even when I sit there and fill up my gallon jug and just let the water fill up the jug, it's kind of like that shower theory where you have all your good ideas in the shower. I will just get nurturing from filling up my water jug. It just allows me to hear the water coming into the jug, and there is just something soothing about that. So, water is huge. And for those of you who are maybe a little deeper on your journey, you might have heard how cold water and why cold showers are really helpful to stimulate the vagus nerve. And if you're not familiar with the vagus nerve, this is one of the biggest nerves in our body that actually is that flip of the switch that can take us from being in that fight, flight, freeze state into rest and digest. So anytime you can stimulate the vagus nerve, it's really helpful to bring more calm and peace into the body. So what I do for my approach is the last 10 minutes, or I'm sorry, not 10 minutes, the last 2 minutes of my shower, I will turn it to cold, and I will make sure that I am immersing myself for as long as I can. And I get into my Wim Hof state of mind and I just push through it. And I eventually, at the end of that, I don't feel the cold on my body anymore. And I do have a sense of calm at the end of that. People also do hot, cold water immersion. So they might be in a hot sauna and then they move into a cold bath. And that's really good for circulation. It's good for flushing toxins, getting things moving, but it also stimulates the vagus nerve. And if anyone has heard me talk about Yona Yinton, she's someone that I follow on YouTube. She lives in the northern part of Sweden, and she literally cuts out blocks of ice in the body of water where she lives, and does like daily cold plunges, which I'm just not there. That's just I'm not ready for that. But there's a scene where she's filming her husband and he is in this state of zen of like she's like, how do you feel right now? And he says, I feel peaceful, I feel calm, and he's literally sitting in freezing water. So there is something to it, there is science, and it affects our biology in a way that can be really conducive to calming. And if anyone else has had the experience of a float tank, they also call them sensory deprivation tank, which sounds really scary, but essentially it's a big pod, or it can kind of be a long rectangular uh, device that basically is filled with magnesium rich water, so much magnesium and salt that you float. And this is in the wellness industry is another way to add calm and to take that time to reduce any sensory overwhelm that has accumulated in the nervous system. I typically will do a float tank for 2 hours and it'll feel like 5 minutes. So it's completely pitch dark. It doesn't have any sounds or lights or anything. And it just gives you this feeling of weightlessness and the ability to just shut everything out. And for HSPs, clearly we experience everything through our senses and our nervous system. So it just gives us that ability to tune everything out in a really tight knit way. So I would love to talk more about float tanks if no one has heard about that, or if you're interested in learning more. I already mentioned swimming as a kid was really helpful, but we don't necessarily have to swim laps. You can do freestyle, whatever feels good in your body, or just play in the water. Just like at a splash pad, put your feet in the water and, splash around with kids. Um, I know that when I get done with Clubhouse rooms, it's really essential for me to take a shower. So I never shower before Clubhouse rooms because I know I want to shower after I've been connecting with all of this energy, even though we're just online. It's still a lot of energy, it's a lot of engaging with different energies. And so it feels really good to just kind of shower and wash off that kind of intensity that you feel as a highly sensitive person when you're connecting and socializing. And also, my favorite thing in the shower is getting new thoughts. So I will intentionally go into the shower to have a creative reset where I might be trying to solve a problem or I'm writing and things aren't flowing. Oh, I just need to go take a shower and I'll come back with fresh ideas, or I'll be able to solve that problem in the shower just through the process of having water wash over me. And it's a great day, or it's a great way to wash off the day. So if you're in the public all day, like for instance, when I sub, I'm around a lot of energy and a lot of people, and it would be a great way to just kind of wash off that day and all of that energy that you accumulated. And to remember, as HSPs, we accumulate not just consciously, but subconsciously. So even if you think you haven't done a lot in the day, the subconscious truth is we've taken in that information whether we want to or not. um, Water also helps us process emotions and different feelings, so that's just another way to kind of get connected with whatever we need to kind of bring to the surface and let go of. Let's see here. And then if you have a bathtub, I do not have a bathtub, which is a big bummer. I'm ready to get like a horse trough and put it in the backyard so I can soak in something over the summer months. But just soaking in the tub, making it a ritual. Maybe you put flower essences, or you put essential oils and magnesium and lavender and different ways to really nourish yourself while you're soaking. And that magnesium really does pull out toxins and really just allows you to kind of empty your tank and restore. So I think baths are wonderful if you have a bath. And then if you just have like a running water sculpture in your home, like just hearing running water. I know when I've gone to like a spa and you have those beautiful, displays of stones and plants and everything, and you can just hear the water. It's so soothing. So you can do that for your home if you want to create that spa experience at home. So that is the category of water. And those are just a few ideas that came to mind that I put in the article. But I would love to hear if anyone has tried a float tank, or if you have a practice around cold immersion, or even just taking a couple minutes at the end of your shower to do cold water, if this has been beneficial for you, if this is something that you can connect with being a highly sensitive person. I would love to hear from anyone up here on stage. If that's something you want to share about, I'll go ahead and mute myself.
Hey, Julie. This is Kasara speaking. And first, I want to say thank you for this room. I just actually finished reading most of the pinned link, and I really appreciate it, the work that you put into it. It's really quite lovely. Um, one of the things, first of all, I'm a lover of water too. I used to fill up my, as a child, I used to fill up my bathtub and put on goggles and just like see if I can hold my breath underwater as long as I could. But I just like just kind of like not hearing anything, and the way you hear underwater is so different than obviously above the water. Um, but I currently live in a home where there is a bathtub, but not only is there a bathtub, but in the bathtub there's this large window, and there's this beautiful tree which now has leaves. But before it had leaves, I would lay there in this bathtub and open the windows because it's pretty warm here in I'm currently in Texas, and I would open the windows and I'm like, oh, this is kind of like moonlight bathing, I think. So it's not just being in the water, um, and feeling that sensation, but I think it's also the way light is hitting you. Because I turned the lights off, in the bathroom, and and I and I've always thought about like not okay. So there's this extra layer. Then there's this wind, right? This wind that could. I love the feeling of wind against my skin. So I need that interaction with the elements, whether it's water or air and fire, anything like that. Right? Because I'm pretty tactile and I want that to interact with me. But I found that to be such a soothing experience, primarily because it, I don't know if it's just because, and I really appreciate how you said, as an HSP, we use all of our senses. And I think to have at least three senses stimulated in a very gentle way does bring that calm or relaxing um, sensation where then I can begin to think. Otherwise, I'm never really thinking like in my body. I'm always like somewhere else. Some, some would say I'm floating like away, which is probably like why those sensory deprivation tanks or float tanks make sense to people like me or you. But essentially, I really, I don't know. Have you ever taken a walk and then that breeze kind of just wraps around you? I think that's very similar to water, and it feels very similar to me. And I guess I'd just like to see if anyone had experiences like that. This is Cassandra.
Thank you so much for sharing. Good to see you. It's so funny when you were describing, I was almost like taken back to this childhood memory of being in at the pool on a hot day and then being underwater and not hearing anything, right? And then you get out and you can hear all the kids screaming and laughing and there's all this activity, and then you go back under and it's quiet again, and it's a totally different environment. And then maybe on those hot days where you come up out of the water, there might be wind or a breeze, so then you have that cross sensation, like you mentioned, of having more than one sensory input, kind of channeling your experience. And how that feels. It's almost like when you get done with a really good workout and you go outside with a sweaty body and skin, and then you have that like cold air on your body. It's just another way of experiencing through your senses. But I can definitely relate to what you shared. And I was chuckling when you mentioned the goggles, because I definitely was one of those kids that would get on the goggles, take my bath, and explore underneath the water and just be curious about it. And just that sense of play, and having to take a bath obviously has a purpose to be bathed, but also just enjoying that time of free play in the water before having to do the actual cleaning part is really enjoyable as well. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. And also, as an HSP, I I'm having a dog or a cat like pets, right? like running your fingers through things that feel good is such a great practice of just, you know, is it self-regulation? I don't even think that's self-regulating because I'm using another creature. But essentially, I think that there's like right now I'm just laying on this couch. I'm like, oh, this couch feels so good, and I bought this couch because I wanted a couch that I could feel like super supported, but it feels like it's got this soft texture, and I'm like, oh, this feels really good. This feels like kind of like I'm floating, but not. But it's, and I don't know. I don't know what I'm saying anymore. But I think you understand. It's like all of the sensations that we're kind of processing so deeply, and I think these things like the water or the air or the things that are comforting to us kind of brings me back into my body a little bit. I'm like, okay, now I can be here on this earth in this moment, and life feels good for just this moment, because life can feel not so good, but it feels really good right now. So it's so important to surround ourselves with the things like that, like wrapping a blanket around us. I don't know, but I didn't want to take us off too far the path that you're trying to keep us on. Julie, so thanks for letting me speak.
Thank you so much. No, I appreciate that. And honestly, you hit on a really important point is these are the different things that can lead us to get back into our body, to ground into our body. And as HSPs, we're obviously having an internal environment that we're responding to and an external environment. And a lot of times we can be stuck in our head. So having a couch with really soothing texture that just makes you feel comfortable and allows you to connect with your body and help you relax is part of that process. And you mentioned pets. Co-regulating with animals is definitely something that lowers our blood pressure. It allows us to feel more relaxed. And just the texture and touch of petting an animal, if they have soft fur, because not all animals have texture that is soothing for me. And so having soft fur to just kind of ground into that feeling, that sensation of being in your body is just so important. So I appreciate everything that you shared, and I didn't think it was off topic at all. So thank you so much for sharing. And I saw Allison, you unmuted. I'll let you go ahead and talk here. I'll mute myself.
Yeah, I just wanted to also add that I was thinking when you were talking about water, I was thinking about my father's mother um, in this old house that she used to have. She had one of these really like big kitchen sinks, and one of the things that as a kid, and I never really understood why, I found it so soothing and comforting, but I loved to sit around and listen to her wash dishes. So when she would wash dishes and the way the sound would come from that old faucet into that old sink, it was just something so, and I could just like and you know, Julie, you already know how I am with smelling things, and the smell of her dish liquid that she would use and the clean smell that the kitchen would have along with the sound of that water would always just make me feel so good. It would just send like tingles down my spine, and I would just relax so much listening to her do that. So that just kind of took me back when you were talking about the water in that way, because I started thinking about, I was like, well, I'm a fire sign and I tend to really love fire, but I do love water. Just like right now where I live, it's raining, and the rain sounds so like soothing and calming. And, you know, I'm going to be doing some work soon, and I'm just going to have my soft music playing and, do my work while the rain is serenading me outside my window. And that gives me calm. The other thing that I wanted to say is I too am a person where I really enjoy the elements. I enjoy feeling the ground. Like if I can go outside whenever I can to really feel the earth, like take my shoes off and feel the earth, feel the grass between my toes and the ground underneath my feet. And for me to touch a tree or even hug a tree, just feeling that energy from that is very soothing. Smelling flowers, touching flowers, looking at them. Nature just really makes me feel good in that way. So you add the element of water, then you have the earth element, then the air. Like Kasara, I love to feel wind, like wind on my face. I'm not enjoying it too much now because of the pollen that's flying through the air. But, when there's not pollen season, happening, I love for the wind to like blow and hit my face when I go outside. Even when it's cold, I'm one of those weird people that's kind of like that. But I guess because Georgia is not cold, cold, but that's another thing. And then lastly, again, I'm a fire sign, so I love fire. So like sitting in front of a fire, looking at a fire pit, lighting my candles, and the calmness of a candle wick flickering with the flame, and it flickers, and looking at the beauty of the color spectrum that shows up in fire, because we always think of just like it's red, but it's not. There's gold, there's orange, there's all this there, and it's all of these elements really activate the senses and can calm me in just such a beautiful way. So I just wanted to also just piggyback on what Kasara was saying about the elements, because I feel that.
I totally agree. And it was funny when I was writing this article, I was like, oh, I'm capturing all the elements. It's so funny that you mentioned what you mentioned, because that is another one of the 5 essential self care practices I called ground in nature. And the first thing I have, the first bullet point is putting your bare feet on the ground, whether that's grass or soil or sand. Oh, when you mention that, that just is so soothing for me. And to have a backyard and have the privilege of that access to nature, that I can just hop out into the backyard and put my feet on the ground, is so soothing. And I love the story that you brought up of your relative who ran water, and that memory that it triggered of you just feeling connected to that running water in that sink. And those are those little things that, we don't really pay attention to maybe when we're growing up, but we have those emotional connections to those memories because they were soothing for us. So I think that's such a beautiful gift to bring awareness around that. And I think a lot of times when people are trying to figure out, where do I start with self care? Where do I start with movement or any of these things that we deem healthy and intentional for our wellness? I think back, well, what was helpful as a child? Because as a child, we had less blinders and less beliefs that were instilled on us, and we really were little intuitive energy bodies going around seeking comfort and peace and relief. And that's kind of where I start when people don't really know where to start in terms of what is a priority in your self care, and how do we know it's going to be something that is enjoyable, and thinking back to what was helpful as a child. So I'm going to also just mention some of these other bullet points that I have for the category ground in nature. Also, there is a great movie called, I want to say it's called Grounding. I could be completely wrong, but it's, oh no, Earthing. That's what it is. And people have had tremendous healing experiences just by laying down on the ground. So laying on the grass or laying down wherever you feel safe, and having that support of Mother Earth holding you. So it's not just a biology, it's also an emotional, mental connection of feeling nurtured, of feeling supported. So lying on the ground is really helpful. Hugging a tree, I have that listed as well. Or just putting your hand on a tree. That tree is rooted underneath the ground with all the other trees that are in the vicinity. And they have this beautiful communication underground. There's so many beautiful things about trees that really can allow us to feel that rooted deep into the earth sense of groundedness. So anytime you can be amongst the trees, I think is helpful as an HSP. And if you're familiar with forest bathing, that's a whole practice. Walking in nature, hiking in nature, biking in nature. There's a trail that I was obsessed with for a couple years where I would bike to this park, and they had a body of water. I think it's called a lake. I don't know. It's man made. And there was this paved path that would circle the body of water. And I would just go around and around and around that water. And there was a section of the paved path that was totally covered in trees. So there was an umbrella of trees. And it was almost like I was just having this forest bathing experience of going through that section of the nature trail on my bike. And it was just, oh, it was so wonderful. And I hopefully I'll be able to return to biking this spring. The weather needs to cooperate. It's been rainy and cold, and winter is clinging here in Iowa. So and then sitting in your garden or your yard, just anywhere you can be observant of nature and listen to the sounds of nature, observe nature. Look at the flowers, look at the way the leaves are blowing in the wind on the tree, or notice the animals that are all around you. Just taking that time to be present in nature is so soothing for HSPs, and I think necessary. Elaine Aaron brings that up as well. In her rest guidelines, she suggests that we have outdoor activity for an hour a day. So if you're not in a part of the world where you can get outside every day, you can still get next to a window. You can watch the animals from your window. I always enjoy the chipmunks and the squirrels and the birds. And just observing nature is always really helpful, even if you can't be fully immersed in it. And then soaking up the sun is so important. We process vitamin D through our eyes and our skin. And so it's really important to get out in the sun as much as you can. And one suggestion is to get out first thing in the morning, because it really helps to regulate your circadian rhythm. And that will allow you to sleep better. And who doesn't feel better after being in the sun? It is such a mood elevator and booster to just experience the sun. It gives me so much energy. And maybe that's because I'm a sun sign. I'm not sure. But I think in general, I respond to a sunny day a lot different than a gloomy day. But I can appreciate those days that are maybe gray and full of rain. Like Allison mentioned, I get a lot of my writing done on those days, because if it's sunny out, I have this like heightened energy that makes me want to go outside and do something and be active versus hunkering down in a chair in front of a computer to write. So I can appreciate both rain and sunny days. And I also feel that the trickling sound, the tapping of the rain coming down is calming. So it does help me write better when it is raining out. So I thought that was a really interesting point that you brought up, Allison. So that is the ground in nature. So I've kind of covered two of these essential categories, if you will, that are really helpful for HSPs. And I'll just pause here for a moment if anyone would like to respond. And if not, I will carry on with the other three. Okay. Oh, go
Oh,
ahead.
yeah. I just wanted to respond just quickly to what Allison mentioned as well, because I didn't really know this was, again, a HSP thing, but I recently have been collecting like scented candles, and I didn't know that, oh, My goodness, like it really does change the mood because it's just I feel more in tune with my environment when that happens. And I think this also goes with the fact that I also drink tea a lot. And before I even drink tea, like the beverage, I would actually just, like take a moment to just like smell. And I'm really like really into like floral, especially even Earl Grey as well, like the smell and all of that. It just calms me. But yeah, I do know tea is also another thing as well. But like even just the smells as well for sure. And yeah, I think the other thing also I wanted to mention where oh yeah, regarding the sun part, I think personally I have a different view on it because where at least where I'm at, I live in Asia, so it's pretty much predominantly summer all year round here. And for me personally, I actually gravitate more towards gloomy, I guess you could say gloomy days or cloudy days compared to sun because it is really hot. It can get really, really hot. When it is sunny here. So for me, it's more of overwhelming, because it does, sting the skin, at least for here. But I can totally understand, like, for places in the West, because I've been to places like Canada, where when it's summer, it is so good to be outside, which is like a stark contrast to where I live. Because I don't like being outside here. To be honest, I kind of like to be indoors. And if I were to be outside, it would be either early in the morning or at night where it's like much cooler. But when I am overseas, it's like it's a different experience. I'm always outside. I'm hiking. I'm always like outdoors because it's just so nice to be out. So I think in terms of if I were to live in the West, like I would definitely appreciate the sun much more. But being here, it's slightly a little bit different. But I think that's also why I gravitate more towards water because it gets really cool here when it rains. So and there have been times where it's not so heavy, so it's like drizzling, so I can actually open the window and just just sit by my windowsill and just feel like the wind and the really cooling air. And sometimes it can get even chilly sometimes. But yeah, I think that's why I gravitate more towards water. But yeah, I can understand like in both scenarios. But yeah, thank you for letting me speak before you move on to the other essential practices, Julie.
Thank you, Casey. And such a valid point. If you ask a Canadian how they feel about sunshine and outdoors versus someone who, like you said, is in a hot region where you don't really have relief from a hot, blazing sun situation, I think will skew our experience and our perspective of that. In Iowa, it feels like winter lasts for 6 months. And when I lived in Washington State, the thing about winter is it sure rains a lot there, but the fun part about Washington State is there's still so much green. So not everything is dead. So here in Iowa, we have the full 4 seasons. And so when it's cold and when it's gray, the trees are barren, the grass is dead, the leaves are still there from last fall, the plants that were once growing are, the remnants of them are still sitting in the ground. So everything just looks lifeless. Whereas in Washington State, they would have uh, plants and flowers and just color all year round. So that was like a huge noticeable difference for me when I lived in Washington State. And then you also have evergreens, which don't lose their leaves. So you have all these beautiful tall trees to immerse yourself in all year round versus here we spend a lot of time indoors in the winter time. So I think that's a really important point to bring up. Um, so a couple of or I should say, another thing that I consider an essential self-care practice for HSPs is the food that we eat. And this is a really touchy topic for so many people because I really truly believe there is no one right way to eat. I am not the food police. and I do not preach or tell people how to eat as a lifestyle coach or as a holistic wellness coach. The beauty of the school that I went to is really to immerse ourselves in all the different ways and approaches to enjoy food, and discover what works best for you and your body. So it's your personal choice. And but one of the things learning and reading with Elaine Aron's books is just how impactful sugar, gluten, and dairy can be on our system. And for just to break that down, I mean, obviously, sugar gives us that rush, that sense of endorphins and enjoyment, but then it also gives us that crash. And so it kind of just keeps us in this kind of addictive cycle of reaching for something sugary to kind of combat that crash. So it's just something that just doesn't really keep our body in a state of peace. We're just kind of responding to that up and down yank around of sugar and how it impacts our body. And gluten is something that is brought up as well. A lot of HSPs may suffer from autoimmune conditions, or just gluten intolerance or food sensitivities around gluten. So you don't have to be a celiac to have issues with gluten. And it is really common for HSPs to be sensitive to products that have wheat. And if you think of wheat, another component of wheat is it is a very high GMO food. So you might not necessarily be reacting to the gluten, but you might be reacting to that GMO food and the different things that they put in that food that doesn't gel with your system. So it's really important if you are going to eat whole grains or wheat products to make sure they're organic, because you're at least saving yourself some of that pesticides and fertilizers that can be toxic for us as highly sensitive people. And then I listed dairy as well for those of us who have a lot of inflammation in the body. That's one thing that can really contribute to inflammation. I personally am lactose intolerant, so I should not be eating dairy. And I have gone on that path of letting it go and then having it come back in. And there are certain dairy like Parmesan or feta cheese isn't as intense for me, but if I get into like a creamier cheese or just have a lot of milk products or cheese and gluten combined, it just really jams up my system. So those are just three things to look at and observe and be self-aware within yourself and see how they impact you and see how your mental emotional state is impacted by that. How do you respond physically? Do you notice a difference in your mood? Those are just things to think about. And then cutting out or lowering your use of coffee, soda, and alcohol. And if you've been on here long enough, you might have heard that I have given up alcohol for an entire year. I'm about 7, 8 months into this process. So it's been something that I've tried to do before in the past, and I haven't been able to do it. And for whatever reason, I was inspired to do this through a friend that was doing this journey herself. And ever since I gave it up, I really haven't missed it. So maybe it was just at the stage of my life where I'm working on a lot of ongoing chronic health issues, and alcohol just doesn't work for me in terms of it throws my sleep off. It makes me feel dehydrated. It makes me make poor food choices. And all of those things impact my health. So it's just one of those things that it was easy to remove it in the sense that it doesn't contribute to any sort of nourishment. And I have just found different ways to be social without it, to connect with friends. And I'm not a judgy person around alcohol. You can drink or not drink, but I just think it's really important to understand your relationship with alcohol and why you drink and how it impacts other parts of your life. So, just something to explore. I don't drink soda. That soda hasn't really been a thing for me. But I was pretty excessive with coffee, and caffeine for HSPs, again, is a stimulant. And it also takes you through those high highs and low lows. So I switched to matcha, which still has caffeine in it, but there are some health components to it. There's antioxidants, there's really good things in green tea that are helpful for your system. And it does have just a fraction of the caffeine, so it's not like you'll have the headache withdrawal from coffee or whatever. So that's a good way to kind of break yourself off of coffee, is to switch to matcha or just even an herbal tea. A lot of herbal teas don't have caffeine in them, so you can kind of figure out what is the best approach for you. But one of the things with coffee is I just have no boundaries. So I will drink coffee all morning, and then all of a sudden I go through this huge dip where I'm hangry, I need to eat food, my stomach hurts. And so for me personally, I didn't even drink coffee until I was 26 years old, and I lived in New York City, and I had a really stressful job, and I started drinking coffee. So I never even really had the coffee addiction in my younger days. It was more once I moved to New York, and that was just what you did. You drank coffee. And so I just have a different relationship with coffee now. At first, I was eliminating it during the week and having it on the weekends, but now I'm kind of fully going through removing it. And when I do take a break from it and I have another cup of coffee, it usually doesn't taste good to me, especially if I'm used to matcha. So it's just something to pay attention and be aware of. And on the article, I go into kind of this idea in my holistic school, the idea of putting things in instead of just taking things away is really helpful, because we can often feel deprived if we're taking away a bunch of things that we're used to having or bring us enjoyment and things we enjoy. If we don't have something to put in that also brings enjoyment and helps us feel good, then we're going to have a hard time eliminating those things that aren't as helpful for us. So I kind of have just a long list of what you can increase and what you can decrease. Um, Eating real food to me is something I'm really passionate about. And I love home cooking. I love cooking as a creative practice, as a meditation. I love the idea of looking at all of the colors of the food, the different textures. And there is a science to kind of getting all of those senses met, all those different flavors. And that makes me feel really complete. And it actually keeps me from binge eating for the rest of the night. So a lot of people might eat a meal at night and not really feel satisfied. I usually think that's because they're not integrating all those different taste buds that we have, and we're not feeling complete at the end of a meal. So we're reaching for a different texture or a different salt taste or a different sweet taste. So home cooking for me is almost like this practice of getting all those taste buds met. So I really enjoy it. So you can check out the article, and it goes through the increase and decrease. And some of this also goes into just sustainable practices and commercial agriculture, and just all these things that as an HSP, I really care where my food comes from. I really care about sustainable practices. I think there's so many people that are completely disconnected with their food, which also then harbors this relationship of disconnect with your body, and then not really paying attention to how this body is impacting you. And there's so many things that these frankenfoods do to us. They create addictions, they create mental, emotional patterns, mood issues. So, food is one of those things that I love to do a deep dive on. And if you ever need support around food, if that's something that you feel like you're really struggling with, I would love to be your guide and to help you as a coach. Definitely reach out to me, because that is something I have been learning about and caring about and passionate about for almost 2 decades. So, eating real food is so important for HSPs, and protein, making sure that you have just a protein snack to kind of even out some of that blood sugar issue is really important for HSPs. Elaine Aron mentions that in her workbook. Um, and the other category here, daily meditation slash spiritual practice. I didn't want to just use the word meditation because I feel like meditation can encompass so many different things, so many different approaches to meditation. But I think for HSPs, making our meditation a spiritual practice, so kind of mixing the two is really important. So for those bullet points I listed, loving kindness meditations, binaural beats with headphones. So there's different levels of sound that can instill soothing relief to your nervous system. Yoga Nidra is really just kind of another body mind connection. Yin yoga, energy medicine, doing anything that allows you to connect with your energy and grounding in your body. Reiki was mentioned, Allison mentioned that, super helpful for HSPs. And then having like new moon or full moon rituals um, in a feminine energy kind of approach to the world. Instead of thinking of life as linear, the feminine approach would be more circular. So we have these 30-day cycles roughly, you know, with the moon, which also, as women who menstruate, we have these cycles that are connected to the moon. So I think having a new moon or full moon practice or ritual is just really helping our system ground and connect with the natural cycles of the world. Sitting quiet with yourself for 10 minutes. I mean, who does this? Who actually sits quiet for 10 minutes? And no stimulation, just allows yourself to connect with your body, connect with your breath. And sometimes a memory might come up, or a thought, or something that you want to take action on. So just getting quiet and tuning in is so important for HSPs. Prayer, and prayer doesn't have to be religious, but setting daily intentions, affirmations, mantras, visualizations for HSP is huge because we have this ability to tap really deeply in with our imagination. So having this visualization can also take us out of that thinking brain and that experiencing imagination brain where you're just kind of letting your brain soak in different imagery, and it takes you on this journey, and you can really immerse yourself in it as an HSP. It's a really great way to connect with yourself and be in your body and have an experience that kind of takes you somewhere else, but it's not a thinking process. um, Connecting with your spirit guides, your guardian angels, your ancestors. And that can be through meditation, that can be through prayer, it can be through sending an intention. There's so many different ways you can do that. And then pulling an angel card or tarot, or being with crystals and stones. Again, these are things that are earth centered. So then you have the ability to connect with the earth and feel grounded. And so it's funny how these kind of do encompass the different elements: the earth, fire, air, water. I didn't intend that. It's just something that I think I was gravitating towards. So that is the other two essential practices. And I want to share one more, but it's quite a unpacking because it's not just one thing, it's several things. But I'll just go ahead and pause here and see if anyone else would like to come to stage and share your response, or if anything resonated with you that I shared. I'll go ahead and pause myself and see if anyone would like to come up.
Oh, Julie, I just wanted to just quickly add to what you said about how you were in New York and how that affected your relationship with coffee. And I think that's actually one thing that I'm glad that you brought up, because I think depending on the environment that you're in terms of not just the culture, but even social culture, you know, it can definitely impact your yeah your way of eating, because depending on like the lifestyle, depending on um, the job that you have, because I can totally relate to that when I used to work for an agency, a marketing agency, and I did not have a really good relationship with food because of that. It was really hard, because I obviously do agree, wholeheartedly to eating healthy because I think what you put into your body is it does obviously affect your body long term, and I'm for it, right? But when it comes to certain lifestyles where you just don't have the time, or at least I didn't really take care of myself in that regard. And I think I also wanted to just go back to the setting boundaries part, where I think I didn't really I mean, I guess it's also the support and also the fact that my environment didn't encourage me to, take care of myself. It was always about the job, it was always about other people, because even that time, like, I had a senior role, so I had to also, like, take care of my juniors and the people, in the team, and it was always just like serving everybody else but myself. So I think even that, did, really did play a big part, with my relationship with food for sure. And not just that too, even rest. I think sleep definitely helps in resetting, at least for me, in my experience, it helps me to reset my emotions, and I didn't get any of that, unfortunately, so yeah, so I'm really glad that you brought that up because it really does affect, our decisions. And but yeah, but I'm glad that I'm not in that job anymore because it definitely gave me time after to really sit with myself and to reflect upon like what kind of life that I wanted. But I know that's like another thing. But yeah, just wanted to mention that. Yeah, I'm really glad that you pointed that out because I could totally resonate with that.
And I love that you brought up stress, and how it can dictate our decision making. And I think for highly sensitive people, we really have to be mindful of that because if we can get ahead of the stress, if we can ground ourselves through these different essential practices, that will really give us the foundation to make better choices. And, when we're in a high stress work environment and we have a relationship that's stressful and we have kids that need our attention or a dog or there's just so many different layers of stress. It's like, where can we put in that time and that space to fill our cup so that we have that recharge station, that we have grounding ourselves so that we can then be in those stressful situations and not react or be as influenced by them. And so I think that is definitely something to consider as a highly sensitive person. And I'm really glad you brought up that point, because I think jobs for HSPs are just really difficult. We've definitely had our room on just jobs in general. And that's something I'm also going to share in a different Clubhouse room, just my kind of practice of how I approach work as an HSP and what works for me. And before I even knew I was an HSP, I was very creative and resourceful for my different income streams. And I didn't know that I was curating it in a way to alleviate some of that stress, but ultimately that's what I was doing. So I've just had a very creative past with work as an HSP. Um, but this last one is kind of it's the fifth of the five essentials, but it's really something that I started writing about it. And then I just started to see a long list of all these self dash words. So I started with self acceptance. And I think self acceptance is something also as an HSP who knows you're an HSP is knowing that the trait is real. And when you know the trait is real and it's backed by science, there's nothing wrong with you. You were born this way. It's an innate biological trait. And you can start to understand and educate yourself with all the science and research and really be knowledgeable about the trait. It allows you to have a deeper sense of self acceptance. And when you have that ability to be self accepting, you're a lot kinder to yourself. And I just wrote under self acceptance, I said, I accept who I am, a highly sensitive person who views the world differently, experiences the world differently than the majority. And I allow myself to go at my own pace. And I create a lifestyle that honors my sensitive nature and finely tuned nervous system. And I share that because so many people have come into this room even and thought that their sensitivity was something they were always going to be challenged by, or something that they had to eliminate in their life or fix in their life. And it's not a disorder, it's nothing to fix, but we do have to approach our life and our lifestyle very differently than the majority. So it does take creativity, and it does take some resilience to accept yourself as you are so that you can make choices that work for you instead of just making choices that work for the majority. So I think that's a really important step as a HSP, is to develop that self-acceptance, which then led me to self-compassion. I love myself unconditionally. I give myself grace. I honor my own pace, my inner wisdom, my intuition. I make my own needs a priority. And being compassionate to yourself doesn't mean you just let yourself off the hook, or you just ignore what things need to be done or your responsibilities, but you come in softer with yourself and you allow yourself the grace that you give other people. Because how many times as HSPs have we given other people that loving connection, but as soon as it comes to ourself, we are so hard on ourselves and so self-critical, which comes from a life of being overstimulated and having people in our lives that criticize us. And because we deeply process that, we then turn that criticism back towards ourself. So that is something that is really important on the healing path as an HSP, to develop that self-compassion. And then self-expression. Self-expression is something that I think a lot of HSPs struggle with, because often in a room full of the 80% that interconnect with people in a different way, our voices sometimes become eliminated because we aren't aggressive or assertive, or we don't allow for our voice to be heard because we're processing, we're a little slower to the punch. Um, so I think it's really important, and this is something this platform has given me, is to express myself in a way that isn't overstimulating. So being on an all audio app versus talking to an Instagram live or a YouTube video or talking at someone, it's just a different experience, and it allows me to express myself without so much stimulation. But also expressing yourself and your unique perspective. Even though we're all HSPs, we all have a different lived experience. We're all different and unique. So just because we're under the umbrella of HSP, we have a completely different world experience. So that is important, and it's important to speak up about that, especially when we're in a room like this where you can safely talk about our differences and know that you're in good company with other sensitive souls. So also self-expression with your energy through dance, making art, singing, and how you feel good authentically to express yourself is really important. Self-connection, we kind of talked about this earlier. Spending time going inward, developing that relationship with yourself, developing that relationship with your body, taking time to be alone and quiet, sensing your inner experience, giving space and time to just witness it. What shows up? Sounds, words, thoughts, ideas, colors, images, memories to process, feel, and connect with. That's a really important part of being an HSP, is to honor all of that inner stimuli that you're processing and not to stuff it down. So creating that time to self connect is really important. And then I go into self worth and self belief. And again, self-worth is something that a lot of HSPs are healing with. And I just wrote, I value myself. I know I know, I guess I should have said, I know my worth. I believe in myself, my knowledge, my wisdom, my gifts, my unique perspective. That is all connected to self-worth and believing in yourself. And I think so many times HSPs are just influenced by a lot of external influences, and where we really cultivate that confidence and that connection with ourself is kind of what I mentioned already. The self connection allows us to have a deeper connection with ourself, and we learn to value ourself and our needs better through that connection. Self awareness, this is something that, as an HSP who has lived my whole life as a very conscientious person, I could never understand people who weren't self aware. And it's something that I've been in relationship with my whole life, just bringing self awareness, being curious about who you are, what your quirks are, what your triggers are, what your boundaries, what your limits, what brings you joy, what makes you feel good. Those That level of self-awareness is the key to your happiness. I guarantee the more self-aware you are, the healthier and happier you'll be as a person. I wrote, I know myself. I'm in tune with all parts that make me, me. The more I know about myself, the better I can be my own best friend. So, again, going back to self compassion, self connection, and then self expansion, self growth. I am a lifelong learner. I love to learn. I think as HSPs, we obviously take in a lot of information. We have the different interests that we love, and we love to be curious and explore and do deep dives. So, self expansion, self growth, be in a growth mindset. A lot of times people are so shut down, they don't want to hear other people's perspectives or ideas or thoughts. So I think it's really important, as we take on all this information as HSPs, to really be in this growth mindset. And what a joy it is to come across new information that's helpful in bringing more self awareness or more self connection or even more self compassion. So, being in that growth mindset, getting information in front of you from other people that are talking about things that you care about, learning about the nervous system, learning about different ways to soothe your nervous system or to recharge and reset your nervous system. Those are just some of the things that get me excited, and I want to expand my awareness of. And I'm open to learning something that I didn't know before, or maybe I learned something that isn't necessarily accurate, and being open minded to other perspectives along that journey. So I am always open to expanding and growing. Growth mindset. We come here to this human experience to grow and evolve, mind, body, spirit. I think that's the purpose of this human experience, is to grow and evolve so that our soul can reincarnate and come as a more evolved soul the next time we experience this human experience on planet Earth. So I'm really connected to that idea of self expansion and self growth. So that is my long winded fifth version of this category that I have mentioned. And again, I've given you a lot of information, and I have all of this in written word on my blog, on my website, which I've linked here on the top. So if this is something you want to reference or go back to and sit with and marinate and process, I've given you the ability to do that with a blog post. And if you haven't already signed up for my newsletter, that is something you can find also on my website. I encourage you to do so because I share a lot of information with my subscribers. And I just started a brand new email series that goes into the foundational ideas of what an HSP is. And I'm going to turn that into a welcome subscriber email series, but I'm kind of just having it as an additional email. So I'm actually sending out 2 emails a week, one on Tuesdays and one on Fridays. So if that's something you're interested in, please sign up for my email list, and I promise you won't be disappointed. I love retaining a lot of information, and when I feel like I'm out of ideas, I just dive into a new book or a podcast or an article about HSPs, and all of a sudden I'm buzzing with new things that I want to talk about. So I share all of that through my newsletter. So that is really the bullet points I wanted to get through. If anyone has any questions or reflections, or you just want to share how this resonated with you, you can go ahead and come up here onto the stage. And if not, we will just kind of end the room here shortly. But I wanted to give some space for anyone to come up here on stage if you're interested. Or if Casey, there's anything that you would like to share, I'll go ahead and mute my mic.
Yeah, Jilly, I mentioned in the room chat, I really do appreciate this room. I feel very seen and understood. And I think I should definitely be in this room more often, but it's just, yeah, it's actually quite late where I am, but I'm glad that I'm awake and I'm able to catch this room. Yeah, I actually did wanted to ask you, like, so how do I sign up for your newsletter?
Okay, I'm going to put the link up here on top. Just give me a second here.
Okay, yeah. But yeah, it's just, I think I really need to be in these rooms more often. Because I think even, just a few days ago, actually, I did feel sort of like scared to express myself. So you did mention there, like in the last part, where self expression, I think that's something that I'm still struggling with, to accept that when I do express how I feel, it's definitely different to the majority, and you did mention a good point about even like on Clubhouse and even on like the places that I've been to, like Twitter spaces, it's always like the loudest that get heard, and the ones that are more, I could say inquisitive and more, I guess, is it retrospective? Like I would think a lot, like when it comes to people sharing, like I would need to, take the time to think about what people share and to be able to respond as well. So one thing I do like struggle with as well is even just moderating my own rooms, because like I don't want to obviously offend anybody, but at the same time, it takes a lot for me to just, you know, um transfer what everybody said, to my head, and then be able to like reflect that outside. Like I do struggle with that sometimes, but I think, when you shared that part, it kind of gives me encouragement to, yeah, like, to give yourself grace. Because, yeah, I have been very hard on myself, for the majority of my life. And I'm trying to sort of reprogram that, and yeah, to reflect the love that I give to other people back to myself. So, again, really grateful for this room, Julie. Thank you.
That's beautiful, Casey. I'm so glad that you shared that, because I know you're not the only one that struggles with that as an HSP. And I think that's why self expression really is important, because I value HSP voices, and I know HSPs have so much to offer because we are information sponges. We are observant. We are connecting the dots. We are seeing the patterns. We are, seeing the world from an eagle eye view, and we have information and we have a sense of knowing that is rich and valuable and should be shared with the world. And so that's why I definitely encourage people, especially HSPs, to speak up and to know and trust that your voice and your perspective has value, even though it is a little more difficult for us to take up space and to insert that dialogue, because others might be more impatient, or they don't allow us to have pauses between sentences. They think we're taking too long to talk, or, we're being shy. And it's really just our ability to process. And so I think you just brought up a lot of important things that other HSPs will definitely resonate with. So thank you for doing that. And I see Jennifer has popped up here. Good to see you, Jennifer. What would you like to share?
Hi, Julie. Just wanted to say again, thank you for the chat. And because of this room, I'm currently I'm a stay-at-home mom, so I had made my food, but rather than going back to the table or the office, I went outside, and I'm looking at this big fat black bumblebee drinking up all the nectar of these beautiful flowers, and just wanted to share my gratitude because it's those simple things and this room and what everybody shared is such a wonderful reminder. So I'm just sharing my gratitude and appreciation for these lovely reminders and the support as always. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Oh my gosh, when you mentioned the bumblebee, I feel like there's a website or a TikTok page or something that shows a bunch of sleepy bumblebees that have fallen asleep in flowers. I highly encourage it. If you can find that, maybe it was just a Google search, but it is the most joyful, satisfying thing to see these bees all tuckered out, just taking a break from all that nectar. So that's what came to mind when you shared. And I'm so glad that you shared that this was meaningful for you and that these reminders helped you take action and approach your day in a different way. That just really humbles me. And I'm really proud of you for taking that time for yourself. It's just so important. So thank you. And Julie hopped up here. Good to see you, Julie. What would you like to share? It's so good to see you.
Hi, everyone. And hi, Julie. Yeah, it's been a while. I saw that today this room was happening. So I made a bit of time and I'm really glad. I really resonate as a highly sensitive person with these reminders and um, going through pandemic fatigue, I guess I would say, and kind of burnout that's been like manifesting as depression, but really like what I've uncovered recently is that it's been just like a lot of built up exhaustion and stress on my nervous system and grief actually that I haven't fully processed yet. And um I don't know if anyone else would resonate with that. But yeah, just like the self-compassion piece is what really is standing out to me from these 5 practices, Julie, that you're sharing. And that is because I recognize that with like we say tired is a very common thing that we feel like socially acceptable to say. But for me, I realized that behind the tired facade was actually like grief. And because like restrictions have been lifting here in Canada, in Ontario, where I'm living, I've kind of like time stamped my grief, so to speak. And I've been like, well, everything's opening up, so grieving time is over, even though clearly my body needs more time. And that's where the self-compassion piece is really, really, really hitting home because I was finding it just clicked this morning. I had a conversation with someone and we were just saying like feeling the joy and the gratitude, like if there's grief, like we kind of have to feel that in order to like feel at peace and be able to experience the good stuff as well. So it just kind of really opened my eyes that like like to be extra gracious and extra like to extend more patience than I guess I'm used to and I think that I deserve, and just allow myself to process for as long as I need and in the ways that I need. And that's, yeah, the self-compassion, the self-acceptance really, really hits home.
I love that, Julie. And I know We've had back channel conversations around trauma and healing and somatic experiencing, and grief is part of that. I'll tell you, I actually wanted to have a room just about the grief of change and how making lifestyle changes brings up a lot of grief, because as highly sensitive people, we have certain limits. We have a lifestyle that we need to be creative about that looks different than the majority. And that is a grief process. And so bringing up the timestamp of like, oh my gosh, this pandemic, is it over? Are we done? Can we grieve it? Is it something that is still being processed in the body? Which I think that is the case, especially for highly sensitive people. So yeah, I'm just kind of buzzing off of that idea of that very simple idea of being more compassionate because of the amount of grief that we're all going through, just living on this planet over the last couple of years. So that's really important to bring up. And I think the self-compassion for me is really elevated through my loving kindness practice, which is something that I really anchored into at the beginning of the year and have been doing daily since, and encompassing a lot of those like worries and stresses and things that are really out of my control. I mean, learning that a relative is not going to be here much longer because they have a life-threatening illness, and my go-to, instead of feeling a lot of fear and worry and frustration because I can't do much about that, I send love to that individual. I first start with sending love to myself, which then fills my cup, and then I push that energy out. And I think that process allows me to legitimately send energy from a full cup instead of that kind of let's fix everyone else and then take care of our needs last. So I just love that you shared that. And yeah, this pandemic is going to change our lives and the way that we deal with stress, grieving, and processing, and all of that. So it's a very important point. Thank you for sharing that. And I'll go ahead and mute myself in case anyone would like to respond before we close up the room.
Thanks, Julie. Both Julies. As a Jennifer, I just appreciate when other people have duplicate names because I'm an 80s baby and every other girl was named Jennifer. No, I'm just kidding. But I appreciate you sharing about the grief because I feel like, and just in general, a lot of things perhaps that HSPs feel across the board is that struggle of fitting into the timing of the world, into others' expectations, others' experiences, of maybe I don't know, like for me, for example, my grandmother passed away on December 21st last year, and she was like my second mom, and I am in this transformative phase of my life where, like, honestly, like a year ago, I'm not the same person. And the second half, like basically since like last fall, Clubhouse has been a huge part of that transformation. Huge support, huge inspiration, huge, huge, huge. And one of the things that helped me was making room for the grief. So like before, if we would travel down to Orange County where we have family, but there's not enough space, like we're really like jam packed in there. Or like feeling pressured to go out with this family or that family because they want to go to lunch or something. Like I made it clear like ahead of time, like we had a little bit of extra money. So I'm like, we're going to get a hotel in Laguna Beach on the beach. It's winter time. It's like $100 a night. Like let's do this, And it worked out to where it just so happened my family ended up staying with the grandparent, and they were super happy. And I got to be alone by myself And I walked every day just on the beach, and I had learned a chant. And I was looking for it, but I can't find it. It's Ami Tuofo, Ami Tuofo, Ami Tuofo, Ami Tuofo, Ami Tuofo, Ami Tuofo. And it's just, and it's helps like release and lighten like the deep, because I feel like we're going down deep down in the grief, and so this kind of helped extend upward like with a lightness, but it was still connected. It wasn't like burying the grief. It was just the movement of the walking, the aloneness, the space, and it's kind of standing up for myself ahead of time rather than feeling like defensive and like being angry on top of the grief, for people like, how dare, it's like, no, they don't understand. I'm expecting them, they're gonna be like whatever. So I don't know if that I don't even know what I'm saying at this point. I'm just rambling, but I just feel like I'm so grateful for this club, especially this room, especially Julie, because like everybody says something and I'm like, yeah, I feel that too. So again, being seen and having the support and the strength of knowing other people are going through this has helped me like step into myself. Because when I hear like Julie say like, oh, I'm grieving, and I feel like, quote, like I should be like over, like how, because it's technically over. But then of course I want to say, oh no, are you kidding me? But then to reflect that back onto myself and be like, remember to do that for yourself too. um, Again, I'm rambling, but I hope the layers in there made sense. Wholeness.
Yes, it made perfect sense. And just, kind of encompasses a lot what we shared in the room, giving yourself space, knowing your limits, being proactive about your limits, and speaking your truth about what would make you feel most comfortable in that event, life experience, circumstance, whatever it might be. And you created space and that connection with yourself that you wouldn't normally have because you just took that extra detail, that ability to stay in the hotel and bring that connection to yourself, because you wouldn't have had the same experience if you had stayed at the relative's home. So I think those are the things too that are so important as HSPs. I don't want to say know your limits like we have limits, because I think there's infinite possibilities, but I feel like know thyself, know where you're capped off, or where you're going to be triggered, or where you're going to experience loose boundaries, because a lot of times with family members it's hard to stand up for ourselves because we have been around these humans for the majority of our lives. So it's hard to uphold those boundaries when we're in those circumstances. So getting ahead of circumstances that aren't supporting your nervous system, or that ability to grieve, or that ability to process feelings and emotions. Connect with your body, connect with your spiritual practice, allow for meditation, and getting around nature or a body of water. Those are all really just ways that we can do good to ourselves, especially as an HSP. So I thought what you shared was beautiful, along with your, is it mantras? What do you call what you sing? Because it reminds me of doing meditations in New York.
Yeah, I'm just very new to it. And I honestly just picked it up and ran with it. I didn't do my usual research. But yeah, it's I think it's a chant or a mantra. And if I find it, I'll message you if I can find it in my YouTube. But I do that, and then actually Clubhouse has a great club for chanting that I discovered, which was super helpful in grieving. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. It's a Buddhist chant, but this club, it's like for anybody and everybody's called Actual Proof Buddhist Club, and it's got morning chants and evening chants, and it's really cool. And I literally just go there because it's a release for me. It's a self-expression, but personally, like if I'm having a tough time, that's when I bust it out, you know? And I can't tell you how it helped me with grieving, but also just being married. Whew, it helped me get out some energy so I could come back to a neutral place and approach my husband rather than just, get in and like be in a heated place or like a place of, intense energy. So, um, like I said, I'm not deep into it. It's just a recent practice I picked up, but I love it. It's hard for me to sit down and meditate. So to me, this is like my version of meditating.
That's beautiful. And I'll definitely have to check out that club. And I was going to say, maybe the reason it feels really soothing for you is it's a form of accessing that vagus nerve. Singing, chanting, om, all of those things allow um, us to flip that switch from fight, flight, freeze to rest and digest through the vagus nerve. So there might be that's at play with it, but I find it very soothing and relaxing as well. I went to many different kinds of meditations from different modalities in New York City because it was accessible. It was, it was so cool to be in New York during this time of growth for me. So I just really appreciate all of those things that kind of ground us and use the throat chakra as that process. So thank you. And I see someone has come up here on stage. Is it Kalita? We'll go ahead
Yes,
and
hi,
yes, we'll let
hi,
you share briefly and then we'll close down the room here shortly. So thank you for hopping up.
hi, Julie and everyone. I'm a bit sick, so excuse me if I cut off. I just wanted to say thank you for having this group. Highly sensitive people. I've been following you all for a while now. Um, so yeah, I've been finding it helpful, and very specifically, there was a room, I think it was a few months ago, on horses, and since then, I wanted to, since listening to that, I really wanted to go visit horses and just see them, feel them, and all of that, so that because so that it could just be a form of self care for me. And so this semester, I'm in school too. This semester, in the middle of it, I thought to myself, okay, I have to find the time for this, and I'm in New York, so you know how it is in New York. It's not like there. It's a bit harder here to find. In New York City is a bit harder to find um, hiking spots that or nature. That's for example, in a way, like for example, it's not like Colorado where it's like everywhere. So what I did is I looked up places to go horse riding, and to my surprise, there were several places. So I went this past weekend with a friend. I really enjoyed it, and I kept remembering this room and how much I appreciated that tip to go and see horses. So thank you for that. And just the last comment on grief. Grief is something that I think, it's something that I think we shouldn't compare ourselves with anything, but especially grief. It's a different pace for everyone. And yeah, it's just important to just sit with it and process it in our own way. And a book that I'm recalling, which I really like, it's very, very helpful. It's called Living with Loss, One Day at a Time by Rachel Cordenas. So if anyone wants to look at that, it literally has a exercise every single day that that we can just read up and just act on in our lives. They have different activities. She has different activities on there. Yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you for the group and for everyone's share.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I am so grateful that that horse room resonated with you. And it's so interesting on this app to constantly crank out content and just not really know how it's landing with people and how meaningful this room has been for people. It just blows me away that, planting the seed and sharing my thoughts and getting HSPs together in a room is so impactful. So thank you so much for sharing that. And one of the things I wanted to add about horses, I've always had a deep passion for horses, obsessed literally with horses as a child. Um, and I had the ability, because grew up in Iowa, to connect with horses. And when I was young, um, I spent a lot of time with horses. And one thing that I recently learned, I can't remember, I think it was probably on a TikTok, but I learned about the electric like system of the heart, and how it actually expands. Our heart expands outside of our body a certain radius. And for horses, their heart expands like 3 times that of a human being. And that's why they're so sensitive. They're so quick to notice those subtleties, just like a highly sensitive person. And I think that's why they're also such a healing source, an animal that has just that electric magnetic heart that just is way more expansive than just our human heart. So I just wanted to share that as well. But thank you so much, you guys, for this room. I have not had a room for the last couple of weeks, and having just this generous, kind comments going around and how meaningful and important this room was to you just gives me that energy to keep going. And Clubhouse has been such a wonderful tool for me to express myself and still be in my level of comfort. So I do appreciate your feedback, and seeing that this room is actually on a Tuesday when I've normally been doing rooms on Thursdays. Any sort of input or feedback around the time or day that works best for you, feel free to leave it in the chat, because that will just help me as I go through the summer months where I'm not as limited to certain days or times. And then also, a bunch of you had asked about the link for the newsletter. I have pinned it at the top. Even though it says Flowdesk, that's just my email subscriber software. So if you actually click on it or tap on it, you will be led to a web page that you can enter your email. And please confirm your email address. There are a lot of laws and rules and all of that around emails. So we have to confirm your email address before I can send you anything. So thanks again for being here today. All of the lovely people who were in the audience just listening and tuning in, or if you're listening to this on a replay, I do have these replays available on YouTube, which just sort of acts like a podcast because it's just an audio version of it. But you can also listen to the replay and see the visual interaction with the room, as well as the chat and the links and all of that here in Clubhouse. So I have replay on because a lot of times people say stuff that I want to go back to, and like that book that was just mentioned. And so I'm grateful for the ability to record these conversations. Whereas back in the day, all of these beautiful conversations never lived beyond that moment. So again, thanks again for your time. Thanks everyone for hanging out here on stage and bringing your questions, your insights, your perspective. It's all very valuable and important to express yourself. And I'm really proud of this club to give people access to do that in a safe, comfortable way. So thanks again. I hope everyone has a beautiful day, and I'll go ahead and mute myself really quickly if anyone else has any last words, and then I'll see you guys not this Thursday, but the following Thursday. I will be making a room. I'm just waiting to check with some others to get that room scheduled. So we'll be back here in a week and a half. But I'll go ahead and mute myself. If anyone has any remaining thoughts that you'd like to express, I'll give you space to do so now.
I found the YouTube link and I put it in the chat, so you can check out the replay for the link too.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jennifer. All right. Well, I'll let everyone go. Thank you for being here. Thank you for participating and listening and tuning in. I really appreciate you all, and I hope you have a beautiful day. Take care, everyone.